Welcome to the Working Well podcast. I'm your host, Tim Borys. Each episode, we explore the human side of business strategy, corporate culture, and thriving in the future of work. Today's guest is Eryn Peters. She's a global talent leader, future of work strategist, and remote work advocate who spent her career helping individuals and organizations adapt to how work is really done. In this conversation, we're going to dive into the big, bold question: if the reality of work has changed, why haven't we? We're going to unpack why traditional companies are still dragging their heels on remote and hybrid models, and what leadership needs to look like in a decentralized world. Whether you lead a team, run your own business, or just want to work better, this episode will challenge you to think differently about freedom, flexibility, and the future of work. Let's dive in. Eryn, so great to have you on the Working Well podcast. Been looking forward to this conversation for a while, and so awesome to have you here.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you have been, we're getting into lots of topics today, but you've been a digital nomad for a lot of years and have some amazing experience, 50 plus countries, and probably there's a lot of people in offices around the world that are a bit envious of that experience. So before we dive into some of the topics, I just want to ask you a couple little rapid fire questions. And one of them, what's the best place you worked from in the world?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do get this question a lot, and it's a hard one to answer because everywhere is very different. But I've spent the most time in Colombia and Croatia, I think probably for similar reasons. Diverse ecology, which means really great and different food, lovely people, and amazing weather.
Fantastic. And then what's the most surprising insight you've learned from working across all those cultures?
Hmm. I think at the end of the day, we're all just human. We're a lot more similar than you really think that we are. So maybe we communicate a little bit differently and everything else, but everybody wants to come to work and do good work and help people, really.
Awesome. Well, and I will concur on that because I've traveled to lots of countries as well. And yeah, humans are humans. And
Yep.
it's, we're all one in this experience of being human and living life. And yeah. And the other thing I'd pull from that too is that in general, people are really good and people want to do well and they want to help. And I think there's so much fear and doubt and uncertainty in today's world. And when we can just remember that we're all humans having a human experience, life becomes a lot better. We don't
Yeah.
have to believe what the media says as much.
Yeah, it just keeps you a little more open-minded to meet people and have conversations, which really is the important stuff at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So we're going to dive into topics on AI. It's a big topic these days. Change management, what this means for workers now and in the future of work. And so, to start us off, when you think of future of work, what type of time frame are we talking about?
I mean, some people say we're living in the future now, right, Tim? But I think a lot of different groups, they have different timescales. Like World Economic Forum, they always do a 5-year forecast. But for me, I do kind of think that the time is now and the future is now, especially because the pace of change that we're dealing with in the future of workspace right now as it relates to AI and technology's roles that kind of impact on job and skills is just so drastic. So that change saturation and velocity is like nothing we've ever seen in this space before. So the future is getting closer and closer to the now than we ever thought possible. And it's constantly changing. So it's not like back in the day when you had the Jetsons futuristic TV show and that was going to be decades in the future. No, what we think is not possible now is possible in 6 months, right? So it's a pretty incredible landscape to be keeping the pulse on.
Yeah. And, that speaks to a lot of the challenges that leaders and teams and companies are facing is just that pace of change is just relentless. And there's a saying that I was facilitating a leadership group recently, and my co-facilitator said, as fast as you think things are changing right now, this is the slowest that things will ever be from moving forward. So embrace it now. It's just going to keep picking up. And you could see this look on people's faces like, oh, I hadn't really thought of it
Oh
that way.
gosh.
You know,
But it's true.
short of a global
It's
EMP that takes us into, the dark ages, uh, pace is going to keep changing. So what have you seen in
definitely.
terms of the impact that this pace is having on leaders and teams and organizations?
Oh, it's just crazy. I mean, if we look at how the pace of change has changed over the past while, I think it was 1984, Intel was making one major organizational change every 3 years. And then in 2012, then the average tech company was making a major change, like three major changes every quarter. And now the change management and digital transformation industry is going to be $12 trillion by 2032, which is insane. So it is only going to get faster. It's the end of the beginning, as we say, when it comes to the phase of AI and adoption. So it's just a whole new kind of world as it relates to change management for leaders, because historically you might hire a third party person to come in and help you manage that one major change. And as soon as that change was done, you could kind of wipe your hands of it, and then they go on their merry way to the next project. But change is happening constantly all around us in every part of our organization with every single team member. And how do we make our teams feel like the rug isn't being ripped out from underneath them every other day? And what should remain constant, what is ever changing? And how do we build change resilient teams and change leadership within every single person in the organization, rather than how we used to rely on that third party person to come in? So because it has changed in velocity, we also have to change the way that we're managing it within an organization.
And what are some of the things you see that are working to manage that change?
Well, part of it is that it's not just about managing it, it's about living and breathing it, right? Change leadership over change management. And I think that needs to be a part of every single person's job description in a way, is that we can't just have change happen to people. They need to be a part of it, and they need to be brought in early to things to help contribute to it going smoothly. I mean, nobody wants to be an order taker all the time. You want to be a part of the decision and maybe be an order maker sometimes. So I think it really does, it has to become a part of your organizational DNA in a way if you want it to be truly a resilient team.
Yeah, and from a leadership standpoint, what are some of the skills that you see leaders, I guess, developing or needing to develop?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is communication, which is the hardest one. How we communicate these types of changes now is very different. For example, we used to be able to have these knowledge sharing and knowledge management platforms. And gosh, by the time we update all of our processes and tools and how we do them, they're already up to date, right? So even how do we even communicate current state, let alone our desired future state with this change is really tough. So I think evolving the way that we're communicating changes is going to be a big skill that leaders need to figure out the answer to and then develop the skill in that direction. And I think the other is trying to understand the intersection of humans and technology. One of the big things that I'm seeing a lot right now in our research, but also just conversations that I'm having, is people are really focusing on bringing in technology simply for kind of efficiencies and productivity. And they're really forgetting a lot of the other aspects that have to do with adopting technology. Like if someone thinks that this new tool that you're telling them to use is going to take their job, they're simply not going to use it.
Yes.
And we really need to go, what should be automated, what should be augmented, and what shouldn't be touched by this type of technology at all? And how can I really explain the benefits to my team in a way that makes sense and is empowering them instead of causing fear? So I think having that strategy in mind up front of why are we even doing this in the first place? Is it because of like vibe coding and all of this stuff online and we just want to put an AI stamp on the company? Or is it really to provide some value to not just our bottom line, but our workers as well?
Yeah, and I love that approach, and I've seen that in the leaders I work with and the consulting I've done as well. Is that there's so much of this push, often led by tech teams, to just implement stuff, and we're going to be efficient here. We're going to do this, and it's not stepping back and saying, how are we letting technology do what technology does best? so that humans can do what humans do best. And on the communication side, having the conversation with the key stakeholders to say, hey, here's what we're thinking. What's your thought on this? Because we're, as we always said, we're smarter as a whole than we are in any individual. But I don't see that happening as much. What do you think the barrier to that is?
I think people often misconstrue soliciting feedback and input as being a democracy. And this is tough, right? Is they go, I don't want everyone's vote, and not everyone's vote should be counted equally, which I agree, right? But I think there's the three Ds and sometimes the fourth, which is discuss, debate, decide, and sometimes disagree and commit.
Yeah.
And we need to understand like who should be at the table, even just to simply be informed in part of the discussion, or at least communicate to them the decision's already been made. Like if this is not at the time to vote or to try and push back. So half the time you have these types of blowups and issues. I think it's because people don't realize what stage of the decision that you're at of those four Ds. And so they might think that it's time to give input and they might think that it's time to give all these new ideas, but you're way too far down that path to change direction now. And if we can learn to communicate that up front of how do I want you to participate in this activity and where are you within this decision line, that's going to reduce so much friction when it comes to the actual implementation and adoption of anything that you're working on.
Yeah. And well, a huge part of that entire process, particularly the disagree and commit, involves trust.
Yeah.
And if you don't have trust and you haven't built the culture in your team, that doesn't happen. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that disagree and commit is one of the most powerful yet often overlooked aspects of, hey, we want this conflict and conversation and debate about where we're going, but then ultimately a decision has to be made. And
Right.
we never know if our decisions are right until after we've made them. So is everyone on board towards that? And yeah, I've seen powerful examples of that when teams have trust and they debate and they're really working for this decision. And when it's made, it's like, okay, everyone gets in line and goes. But
Mm-hmm.
I've also seen the downside where none of that happens. And then people are just grumbling under their breath for months or years and sabotaging the project and it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I think the other side of that too is you really do have to set the time frame for when you're calling that project a success, right? Because I'm very willing to have a team member come and say, I told you so, if they were in the disagree and commit club and it didn't go well. But when is the time frame where we're going to know if we made the right decision or not? And do we reverse it and try other things, or do we stick on that path, right? Because if people are sabotaging a project for years, I mean, one, what project is taking years nowadays? Because how is it still relevant? But two, like we really need to say, start treating work like experimental sprints, right? Of we're going to try this and we're not going to change anything for a month or 3 months. And then we're going to value it on this criteria that we suspect would mean that it's successful or at least give us early indicators. And then only at that point will we course correct. But you need to have everyone pulling in the same direction, at least for a while, to see if things are going to work, I think.
I absolutely agree. And the interesting thing about this conversation we're having now is that it has nothing to do with technology. It's
Yeah.
leadership, communication, building trust, building team dynamics, culture,
Mm-hmm.
and managing or leading through change, as we want to call it. The management and leadership often get used interchangeably, but yes, they are very different. I've been guilty of that. But yeah, so if we layer technology on top of this, what what impact does that have? What implications?
Yeah, I think, technology is always going to be a little bit of a double-edged sword because in some instances, especially because it allows you to move so much quicker as well, right? So you're going to fail faster and you might succeed more. But I think when we talk about AI specifically, there's two main buckets that it's typically applied, which is either to automate certain things with very little human input, or there's augmenting things, which is a human is using it to be more productive and do more than what they could before. And then, of course, there's areas where they're not going to be applied. But if we're just talking about those two where AI and technology can be used, the tough part is that if you're in the automation bucket, you don't really have a lot of human in the loop area. So things are going to go wrong. They could go very wrong very quickly, and no one will know about it for a while. And so we have to figure out what is the level of human interaction with technology that we want to have, not just in the sense of who's going to be using the tool, but who's going to be checking if the outputs are correct. How is this going to be impacting their psychological well-being? How is this going to impact the bottom line? How does this interact with the rest of our technology? Because, gray work when it comes to AI is also incredibly high. Gray work meaning the amount of work you have to put in to make all of these different systems work together, because we no longer have these huge SaaS monolithic apps that we're going to be using. It's going to be tons of independent agents and systems that need to interact and connect in ways that they didn't need to before. So how does technology impact change? Incredibly so when it comes to not just the pace, which is what we've been talking about, but the complexity and the ability to see everything that's even happening within an organization. In some instances, it will be more visible, but in others, it might be more invisible and causing problems that we don't even realize are there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point I hadn't considered, is when you say that there's monolithic apps that run everything in larger companies, coming at it from the entrepreneur, small business side, that like the gray stuff and the integrating 15 or 20 different apps is just reality for most entrepreneurs, because we don't have these monolithic custom built software systems or anything in the business.
Yeah. Well, they say that AI is going to be the death of SaaS, right? Like humans need the interface, and that's really what SaaS has done, is made these really easy to use interfaces for us to click around in something like Salesforce, and it's fully customizable. But if I have an agent that can just talk database to database and perform a series of tasks, we don't need interfaces anymore. And that's what we pay a lot of money for a lot of these SaaS solutions.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that the tech industry will be upended by its own creation.
Typically, yes.
So as we look, call it 5 years in the future, where do you see us being in terms of this technology human integration?
Yeah, well, I mean, the theme continues to be hybrid, right? We had hybrid working with remote work and on-site workers, which we talked a little bit about at the beginning of the call. We have the hybrid that is employees versus freelancers, so like portfolio careerists and these kind of fractionalized teams. That was the next big thing. But now it's going to be hybrid workforces of humans and agents. And how do we manage a workforce that has varying skills across a number of teams, countries, systems, and technology tools? And what does that actually mean for the way that we look at not just how things get done, but even things like compensation? Does the creator of an agent get compensated for that? If I'm more productive and I do more in less time, how do we move away from time and materials model, which is I pay you X number of dollars for 40 hours a week? Do we all end up looking a lot more like a freelancer and a portfolio careerist that get paid on output or value? So even that alone, I'm saying, how do we think about compensation? How do we think about managing teams that are both real people and pieces of technology? It becomes very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that I wouldn't even say we're in the messy middle yet. We're at the beginning of this. And what I see a lot these days, especially in larger companies, is that the employees are just getting more and more work dumped on them and loaded on them. It's like, oh, you're 40% more efficient now. Great. Here's 80% more work.
Yeah, but I think this has always been the case, right? Like the reward for doing good work is getting more work.
Yes.
I've never seen it, even historically speaking, where it's going, oh, you've done such a great job on this project. Why don't you take the rest of the week off? Like that's not how it works.
No.
So I think that will be the same today for a while. But I do think that hopefully we will start to see more task diversity as well, of you don't have to do the slog stuff anymore. You can spend more time being creative and innovative and really just a more well-rounded day than doing something like data entry for hours on end.
Yeah. Well, and that has been the value proposition for the freelancers is that, hey, when you have your shit dialed in and you're effective and efficient and you can produce more with less time, you can use that time to do what you want with, travel the world and see different things. Whereas in the traditional corporate model, yeah, it's like you're paid for 40 hours a week, or and you're paid for 40 hours a week and expecting to put in 60 in a
Mhm.
lot of environments. And so how do you see that changing in the next 3 to 5 years?
When it comes to the amount of time that people are working.
Yeah, the corporate mindset around that whole traditional structure.
In the next 3 to 5 years, nothing, to be honest. I mean, let's look at the kind of remote work adoption cycle that we've even had, even with COVID, which was such a massive push in that direction of more people working remotely. And people just don't know how to do it still because hybrid teams are messy. And if I don't see bums and seats, how do I know that you're actually doing your job? And so I think it's a big challenge for people to understand, what does productivity look like? And how can I actually say that someone's done their job today, yes or no, enough to let them go off for the rest of the day? So we still have a lot of work to do in evolving the way that we manage people and moving away from, very much like even autocratic way of leadership where one person decides things, and into a more trust-based environment where I don't really care what time you log on as long as you do your work and I can see that you've done your work. It doesn't matter to me if you're in Japan or Croatia or Colombia, right? So I think in the short term, especially when we look at enterprise-sized companies or government institutions, I don't see anything changing all that quickly. But a lot of these smaller, scrappier, faster moving, more agile companies, we're going to start to see some real favorites come out when it comes to the worker for those that learn how to adapt and create more enjoyable work environments. So culturally, I think we're a ways out still.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that because that's exactly what I've been seeing. And I even see companies regressing back to pre-pandemic. Like
Mm-hmm.
I live in Calgary, and several companies have mandated 5 days a week back to the office now, and I'm just like, what? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's there's so much evidence out there that that's actually way less effective, and people keep resurfacing the same rationale is that, oh, you can't build culture and team dynamics and creativity and blah blah blah, and I'm like, you've actually done that. You've built communities digitally, and so talk to me a bit about that, like help enlighten some of
Yeah,
the
I
people
mean,
out there about the digital remote hybrid culture building.
totally. I mean, let's just start with the fact that the free fruit that you give in the office does not make a strong culture, right? Like nobody wants
The
your
proverbial
ping
water
pong
cooler.
table. Right. I mean, the perks that you put in an office are really just to create a sense of Stockholm syndrome, right? They're not actually there to benefit anyone. And forced fun doesn't benefit anyone. So I think the main difference that I've observed in, my years of working as the future of workspace is really just that remote teams have to be more intentional. And that really is the key to building strong communities and strong relationships, because it's very easy in an office environment that we would only interact if I'm, walking by your desk, or it's like kind of community by osmosis. Like we're friends because I see you every day. But as soon as that person doesn't work in the office anymore, you probably never speak to them again. But in a remote environment, I might interact with you if I need something. And I'm like, gosh, Tim's in my inbox again. And it just means that he wants me to do this task 10 times. So if I want to be friends with you, I have to go out of my way to call you and just have a virtual coffee, or I have to go out of my way just to say hello for the sake of saying hello. And it's a muscle that not everyone knows how to flex. And you have to get really good at being intentional about relationship building. And I've got people that I worked with 10, 15 years ago, never met them in person. We still chat a couple times a month. I know everything about their kids and their family and their dog because I've seen them on camera behind where they are. You're embedded in someone's life in a different way in a remote environment than you are in an office environment, where it's very easy for me to put up a wall. It's very easy for me to separate and segregate my life. So I do think that you can bring your whole self to work in a remote environment in ways that you can't in the office. So what does that mean for actually doing this in practice? Create intentional spaces where people can actually build relationships outside of having to get anything done. And I don't mean forced fun, like let's go bowling. I mean, how can we spend time at the office even playing video games? And it's casual, opt-in, whatever you want. Or we do fun little, we used to get everyone to put in baby pictures and stuff, and you can guess who's who, like random fun little things that you can do to take a break out of the day and meet people that you wouldn't be able to. And I think you can create kind of the water cooler vibe if you want to online. You have to create instances where people can just stumble into each other. So one thing I used to do is I used to keep my Zoom room unlocked. So when I had my next meeting and back-to-back meetings, someone might show up. I might still be finishing up a conversation, but these two people who are in the room, they maybe never would have met before. I can tell them a little bit about each other, and then they can go have a virtual coffee another time. So I can create that kind of running and stumbling into you in the hallway type variant if I wanted to. But I think intention is the key.
Yeah, love it. And so you've mentioned about people haven't been taught the skills, and you would think 5 years or more, over 5 years into when the pandemic started, that these skills would have been developed by leaders. Why do you think leaders are still struggling to lead in a hybrid environment or remote environment?
When we look at the power of employee engagement, it's hard to measure. And I think it's tough for people to see the importance of learning those skills, which is probably why they haven't. Like, what is the most obvious ROI? Your sales team and how they perform. It's the closest to the money. Every time that we do take one step outside of that, it gets harder and harder to see where that value comes in. So I think when we talk about stuff, even like an HR team, it's tough for them to see the value, let alone this intrinsic feeling of connection to each other and the company that is building culture. So I think that I don't blame anyone for not having developed it, but I do think that it is like pretty tough for people to justify or figure out what that kind of exact feeling is and how do we create that.
Yeah, and you mentioned intentionality. Uh, I know in the executive coaching, leadership coaching work I do, that's a just a huge topic. Is that what are you actually trying to accomplish, and are you stepping back to look at what's the status quo, and why am I doing that? Is there might there be a better way? And that, I guess, the how the leader is showing up in that situation to look in the mirror and reflect on what are my actions, what am I doing to improve the situation, rather than continually looking for what's wrong with what other people are doing.
Right.
And that's a very human thing, and I guess takes us back to what we said at the beginning about the human aspect of change in technology. Is when people are so busy and running ragged trying to do all these tasks, curating that moment of reflection, the downtime to think and actually put some thought into the intentionality of their actions, is, I don't feel, happening near as much as it used to.
And I think it's tough too, because when you're so busy in all of this, sometimes you lose sight of that North Star, right? Or why we're doing something in general is maybe it's because it's what we've always done, or you're just simply ignoring all of this new information that you might have gathered throughout all of these tasks, and you did miss an opportunity to recalibrate when maybe you should have. So trying to figure out when is that right moment of reflection and pause, which probably doesn't perfectly align with a quarterly review. And how do we build in those kind of different checkpoints of saying, hey, are we actually still going on the right path in the right direction? And when do we course correct? And are we being intentional about every single step of the way?
Mhm. And how do you think building community comes into that from the leadership action standpoint?
Definitely. I think it really depends on who your community is a big part. Is it customers? Is it your employees too? But I think that when it comes to building community within organizations, it really has to be authentic. I think is the biggest word I'm looking for here. It can't be, I want a sense of community because it's going to reduce attrition and churn. Or I want a sense of community because if we have culture that's like a family, then you're willing to do more and go above and beyond when probably you shouldn't for a job. So I think people can really smell and suss out when it is truly authentic and when it isn't. But the value of having community, I mean, if you're having fun, yeah, you are going to do a lot more for each other. Or maybe these small bumps in the road when it comes to change and hiccups when the implementation of this stuff doesn't go well, it doesn't bum you out as hard because maybe you can laugh about it, or maybe you can move on, or maybe you're getting rewarded with this community and culture for having tried something and innovating. And so the type of culture that you're creating, if it's one that accepts failures as learnings and can poke fun at each other of like, yeah, we messed that up, but pick yourself up by your britches and keep going kind of a thing. Like all of these things can just help smooth everything over and make it a much more enjoyable place to be. And I would also just kind of challenge leaders saying, like, when was the last time you had fun at work, right? Like, you can be a part of this community too. And how can we make this great for everybody involved, not just seen as community being another task for some person in HR to figure out how we get engagement numbers up. Like, that's just not really it. Figure out what you want to accomplish from an intrinsic standpoint with community and authentically do that every day.
Yeah, authenticity and the mindset with which you're approaching it. I like how you had said both going above and beyond, and how people automatically think that means working extra hours. But
Mhm.
realistically, going above and beyond is really just putting extra intentionality and focus into the time you are there and being engaged and putting your best work in.
Yeah,
And that can even mean working less hours because when you do that, you're going to be a lot more effective and efficient, and you'll probably have fun
totally.
doing it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too, like, because what's the opposite of if you don't have these things? We talk a lot about burnout, right? And when you have too much change in this day and age, it's easier to burn out. And I think there's a common misconception that working extra hours equals you're going to burn out. And that's not true because with true burnout, vacation time doesn't fix it. And sometimes it can make it worse. But burnout happens when inputs don't equal outputs. I'm working lots of hours and I'm not seeing the results. I'm working lots of hours and I'm not having fun. All of this type of stuff, right? I'm not being compensated well. But if you're doing something you love and you're really passionate about and you're having fun doing it, you'll burn the midnight oil every night of the week if you wanted to. And you're energized by that.
Yeah.
It doesn't deplete from you. So I think it's important that we separate working time and effort and we actually look at inputs and outputs. Like, what am I getting out of all of this energy that I'm putting in? And we have to make sure that that math makes sense for everybody on our team.
Yeah. Oh, I resonate so much with that. Is some of the most fun and productive and exciting and just genuinely engaged times I've ever had in my life have been as an entrepreneur building a business and working crazy hours, but I wouldn't have changed it for the world because I had an incredible team. We were all bought in 1000% and just loved every minute of it. I think I've built some amazing friendships with my team and colleagues, and that was, yeah, like we were in it. This is the whole startup mentality, right? When you're in that environment, the energy and the atmosphere and the creativity just comes out. And so, you've talked about some of the things that leaders can do to try and build that in their team. What else comes up for you in that, and how you do that in sort of a mid to larger size company?
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about making sure that people are brought in on discussions early as it relates to change. We talked a little bit about that relationship building and trust building, but I think also having a really strong sense of agency and ownership is important as well. So one of the reasons that in this startup environment that you're talking about, it often creates that really big energy is we also look at things like compensation, and we also look at things like the size of the team matters. So one, in terms of compensation, usually startup people have skin in the game. They're getting stock options or shares, they're investing in different ways. So this could pay off big, right? But the other side of that too is just thinking that in a startup environment, usually you're all wearing many hats and you're all kind of sharing decision making and really in that highly collaborative environment when it comes to the direction and steering of the ship. And how can we create moments where different people have agency and ownership in different ways, even in large organizations, whether they're able to own a whole certain piece of something and lead and guide a team of people doing it. I'm not saying everybody needs to be, C-suite and management level, but at least giving them some agency over something and making everyone feel like they have a seat at the table and that their voice is important. You can't bring everyone in on that, third or fourth D that we talked about when the decision's already made. How can I actually relinquish and release some of the decision making to people on my team and trust them and support them in different ways so that they can feel like they're driving some of this change instead of it happening to them?
Yeah, well said. And the other part of it is that feeling like what they're doing is making difference. There's like the
Mhm.
purpose, passion, enthusiasm towards that purpose.
Mhm.
When people are doing things that they really believe in, they will put in more effort and they will do better work and they will engage in a completely different way. And we don't see that in a lot of mid to large size companies. Lots of zombies out there just showing up and um, breathing the air and tapping the keyboard every once in a while, but not necessarily engaging in a way that is effective for them or the organization.
Yeah. And it's this is a concept that I've thought about a lot and grappled with sometimes too. I'm curious to your thoughts, but I'm sure many of us have heard the building a cathedral concept by Simon
Yeah.
Sinek. Of you ask two people what they're doing, one says I'm building, brick by brick and laying bricks. The other says every brick I lay is part of this cathedral that we're building together. And so, who's more motivated? One who can see this big, beautiful cathedral, or one that sees just in front of them? And in the startup world, a lot of stuff is very mission driven, and lots of people want to work for nonprofits. And it's very clear that kind of intrinsic motivation that you get of building and having this vision. And as someone who has taken a side step away from all of this really motivational work, I did, finance and luxury automotive for a short stint of my life. And I was like, God, I'm just making rich people richer. And I hated it. But at the same time, I've also given advice to friends of this doesn't have to be the job where you're solving all the world's problems, just you and your team. And sometimes a job can just be a job, and that's okay too. So
Absolutely.
I'm curious, how do you balance that too, where you're going, gosh, everyone needs to think that they're part of this really big thing, when sometimes, yeah, you are just laying a brick, and it's okay to just lay bricks for a while.
100%. Yeah. And I've been in that situation as well. And so I think yeah, it's the whole find your passion and do what you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. And it's great in theory, but in reality, we need to pay the bills and people need to show up and earn an income. And that sometimes that requires doing things you might not enjoy as much. But how are you looking at the bigger picture? What is doing that? How is doing that helping you in other areas of your life? What are you doing with the financial income you're bringing in? How are you improving your life? You're working towards bigger picture goals personally, professionally. That perspective can help as well, because if you are doing something you don't love and you don't have a bigger picture plan and it's not moving you towards anything, you're just showing up and grinding every day. That sucks. And it's not going to get any better. But if you know that, hey, for the next year or 2 years, I'm doing this because it's going to take me to here and I'm going to gain this skill, or I'm going to build this bridge or relationships that I need to move to the next level. Again, that's part of the bigger picture cathedral. Yeah, you're laying bricks in the
Mhm.
moment, but you can still see the you can still see the end vision.
Yeah, and maybe that's the difference, right? Is that it doesn't have to be the company's vision. It doesn't have to be this cathedral. It can be, I'm learning how to lay bricks so I can go build my own home, right? And I think that's part of it, is making sure that we're all aware of everyone's visions and how we contribute to each of them, whether or not it's in the same place. And I think that's a skill that leaders need to develop as well, is like none of us should be operating on the false thought that someone's going to work with us for the next 20 years or 10 years, or to be honest, 3, because the average tenure is around 2 these days, especially in the technology industry. So how can we have honest, frank, and transparent conversations about what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to do out of here? So we can make sure that you're getting the most out of this time that we spend together as possible. And I think that's a really authentic conversation that can be had.
Yeah. And that's, to be fair, a pretty common conversation I have with my coaching clients is there's so much stress and burnout out there. And a lot of that is just not managing the vision well.
Mhm.
And when you start to get down that spiral, if you're not seeing the bigger picture and how your actions in the moment connect to that bigger picture, you lose energy, you lose enthusiasm, which causes you to be less effective, and it just becomes a vortex that sucks you down. And yeah, I meet with lots of people that make great money. They're in roles that are like strong leadership roles, and they're miserable. And so and they often come in and are like, well, I'm talking about, I'm dealing with these challenges with my team and organizational dynamics and all these tactical things. And we often just step back to the bigger picture and is like, how are all those issues related to this? And then you see this like, oh, and this light bulb go off. And those are when the conversations get really productive, and we can start to make progress because we're all humans having a human experience, even at work. And so many leaders forget that. And when they start to see that in their team, then they can have different conversations. You talked about communication as being one of the biggest factors. That's a communication that many leaders aren't having with their teams.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I think communication is just so broken though in organizations
yeah,
these days. Like our calls and one-on-ones should not be about updates.
oh
Like I should be able to know what you're doing without having to talk to you.
yeah,
Like these are the types of conversations you need to have in your one-on-ones, is how are we tracking towards our goals together? How are you tracking towards your goals that you have outside of this? And so unless you're relationship building, brainstorming, or tracking towards this, then that's there's no other reason for you to really have these types of 3 hour long reviews of tasks that are already in some sort of a shared board that you can see anyways, you know?
yeah. It still blows my mind how many executive level leaders either don't have one-on-ones with their team, or they do, and they're just like viewing metrics that are in the dashboard that everyone can see, and or diving into logistics on some project that's going on that they probably should talk about in their tactical meeting with their as a team. And
Mhm.
so yeah, they're not addressing the human aspect of leadership. How are you tracking towards your vision? What's really important to you? What are the challenges you're
Mhm.
facing outside of this project?
Right.
Yeah. And so what have you seen? What are some of the wins you've seen for leaders, particularly in a remote hybrid environment, that leaders are doing well, that's working?
I think what a lot of leaders that I've seen do well is They really know how to communicate that vision, which is kind of a core theme of what we've been talking about. So the ones that can get on that 1 hour all hands town hall call every month and then leave the whole team feeling super energized from that. So yeah, I do think in a lot of ways being a leader is about really vividly expressing that shared vision together and getting some of that raw and alignment, because it's very rare in a remote and hybrid environment to have everyone in the same room, whether it's in person or virtually. So how you're using that time is super important. And I think especially from a C-suite and like CEO level, it should be about realigning that mission every single time that you can, because remote and hybrid, there's more chance for me to go into my little silo in my Slack channel and like slightly deviate from the path. So making sure that you're constantly focusing on alignment, I think, is the most important thing that you can do. Other ones that are doing it well, I think they do really focus on the time that they spend in person together to be highly valuable. So a lot of fully remote companies, they also do team offsites. Well, I guess they're on-site if you're remote to begin with.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
getting everyone together to just straight up relationship build. So not having us come in and do whiteboarding sessions on how to plan for the next 6 months, which probably won't be relevant anyways, but just straight up having fun together and like really focusing on the humans in the room more than anything. So I think the best leaders that I've worked with in this way, they really know how to navigate when it's time to really buckle down and how to navigate when it's time to maximize the humans on the other end of all these Zoom calls.
One thing I know I've experienced this in the remote side, and we haven't really talked too much about it, is the personal effectiveness, personal performance, and guardrails that are set around remote work. When you can work anytime, anywhere, a lot of times people just end up working way too much and get into a negative uh, effectiveness or negative productivity loop. What are some of the
Mhm.
boundaries and positive habits that you've put in place to help you succeed?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll first have to put in a caveat that like I do have ADHD, so like I can hyper focus on random things all the time. So admittedly, I don't have great personal boundaries when it comes to work. But I've seen people who do and people who manage it well, and I've tried to create team environments where people can manage it well. I think my biggest cheat sheet is every time I start working with a new team member, I have something called a personal operating manual. It's an adapted version of a playbook by Atlassian. And basically just tells me like, how do you like to work? Because some people have kids that they want to go pick up from school. So between 8:30 and 9:30, they're just never going to be online. And same with for school pickup in the evening. Or some people have health issues. And so after lunch is a really tough time for them when it comes to blood sugar levels or anything in general. A lot of creative people I know really thrive working super late hours. So mornings are not great for them. So how can we communicate in advance the things that we need to be effective so that other people on our team can not only accommodate them, but can force us to adhere to them? So I am very much here for like time on shaming, meaning if you told me that you're going to be offline and you're online, I'm going to call you out on it. And this is all of us trying to make a better work environment to have boundaries, is to communicate them in advance and then help each other to adhere to them if you need them to be. But I am a firm believer that work is not a time and work is not a place, it's a state of mind. So you don't have to work the same hours every single day, and you don't have to work at the same desk every single day. uh, you really have to figure out what you want to accomplish. And sometimes if that's just checking 10 emails and logging off, like that's okay. But figure out day by day, week by week, what works best for you, and feel free to constantly adapt and change that. You don't have to stick to any one thing for a long time. So I think in the same way that we encourage leaders to have those moments of pause and check in, you also need to do that in this environment and go, gosh, have I treated myself like a houseplant today and had water and sat outside in the sun for 10 minutes? Maybe go touch some grass. So I think it's important that everybody just takes a moment of pause, and then leaders force people to take moments of pause to reflect if it's still working for them so they can continue to support and coach them in the right direction.
And I love that. And I love hearing those because it aligns so closely with my background in health, wellness. And I spent a couple decades working with executive leaders doing exactly that, is like, hey, there's a human performance aspect of physiology, psychology that allows us to perform at our best. And sitting in front of a screen for 8 to 10 hours a day without moving is not it. And so,
Mhm.
as leaders, how can we encourage our teams not from a and this is where it's like, oh, well, we have to give people stress breaks and things like that. It's like, no, screw the stress breaks. Like, help people perform at their best, move their body, hydrate, sleep, and just get some sunshine every day. If everyone did that, the world would be such a better place. But corporate mindsets and corporate standard operating procedures are just not set up for that. And I'm still
Mhm.
blown away that 5 years after the pandemic, that hasn't changed a lot.
Totally. I mean, even just doing something kind of silly of like ABC calls, anything but share. I don't care if you're folding laundry, if you're standing, if you're like walking down and around the park, but none of us are allowed to be in our chair, right? Like anything just to mix it up a little bit and move around is amazing. And I think the more we can start meeting each other where we are instead of forcing ourselves to be in any one spot, mentally and physically, like the better.
I've never heard that term ABC, anything but chair, and I'm going to use it because I love it. It's amazing.
Please do.
I'll make sure I give you credit every time I use it. But yeah, that's awesome, and it's so true. Like I, I consulted with a company one time, and there were 400 employees in the company. They spent over $500,000, and this is pre-pandemic, significantly pre-pandemic. Spent over $500,000 on sit-stand desks, and facilities put them in. Didn't tell anyone. Everyone just thought, oh, we got new office furniture. And this is like 6 months after the desks went in, and I was at an executive's desk, and I was like, "Oh, this is a cool sit-stand desk." He's like, "This is a sit-stand desk?" And I'm like, "Yeah, see these buttons right here? You can do this." He's like, "No way! This is incredible!" And so I ended up actually going in and doing a consulting session for their organization, and I'm like, it's stuff like that that just blows my mind and drives me crazy. Facilities had this great idea. Communication wasn't looped in, and no one was told about it. So some people
Mhm.
figured it out on their own, but there's probably 80% of the workforce that just didn't get the memo. And
Totally.
yeah, but and it was from a good place. We want people to sit, stand, and move and do these things. No education around how to use it technically or logistically. And that still happens to this day. And this is 2025.
Yeah, but even better is I think one thing I like about that story is the fact that it happened with the leader. And I think leaders need to be super aware of the precedent that they're setting, whether or not they're doing these things for themselves. And I think it's easy for us to say, oh, if you're in an office environment, I can actually see when you're checking out for work every single day. And in a remote environment, like nobody can tell that I'm working. Well, guess what? They can. Like people can see your green light on at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, and they know that you're online and actually working, or they can see your calendar shared availability of when you're doing different things. And so I think one of the best things that leaders can do is to not just like say that it's okay and acceptable to do these things, but actually put them into practice and make it visible. Of like, especially like male leadership, put it in your calendar, visible to everybody at the company when you're going to go pick up your kids from school.
Yes.
Like the message that sends on so many different levels is so valuable and important. And leaders, use your standing desk and get up there, or make sure that you're getting out and exercising, or take that call from going for a walk around the block without forcing everyone to be on camera because that's exhausting, right? So give people permission, but also lead by example and be open that you're also human and need to be a little houseplant sometimes as well.
Yeah. Well, and I have this conversation with leaders all the time is that they talk about culture and, oh, we need to improve our culture. And I'm like, where do you think that comes from? And they're like, oh, well, we have to communicate this. And I'm like, forget all that. Your actions on a day to day basis determine the culture. You can say what you want the culture to be, none of that matters. It's all irrelevant if it doesn't align with your actions. And so, yeah, you nailed it. Like, just model the behaviors you want to see as a leader, and you will get that in your team.
Mhm.
But that requires leaders to look in the mirror and to accept that a lot of the responsibility is on their shoulders.
Yes. Yep. Easier said than done.
Yes. So how would you wrap that up into this glorious takeaway for the listeners to what's the number one thing that they can do to live into the future of work?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is like, it's just relax. Like, like this is so stressful and it seems like so much to do, but everything we talked about today is like, it's really quite simple, right? Is don't get caught up in the BS. Just take it day by day and have real conversations with people and try to be a little bit more relaxed about things because it'll help people around you to relax. It'll help you to recenter and refocus on whether or not you're doing things that matter and just to get out of that crazed hecticness that happens. So I think let's just take a gentle approach to some things without bringing any frenzied energy. And I think it's going to solve a lot more problems than you think.
Perfect. Last question. What was one phrase, idea, or word that you think should be retired from the workplace vocabulary?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, a lot of them would come back to like my work with freelancers in general of like contingent workforce or like human cloud in this way of just like why are workers a backup plan? Like if freelancers are backup plan, why can't we make this a part of our strategy going forward? But there's just so many different buzzwords that I think are out there these days. And yeah, I mean, we're renaming all the same stuff, right? It's like whether someone's going on, what do they call it now? I don't know. People might have to edit that part out.
That's what I know.
Like, it was basically like, it's like Gen Z came up with a new term for when you go on sabbatical. Something about like an extended vacation or something like this. But everyone's like, is that just like a sabbatical? So like all these different buzzwords, I think, are just recycling and repackaging some of the stuff that we've talked about for a long time, but we're trying to make it clickbaity and markety in a way. But yeah, I mean, again, back to basics, just get rid of the jargon and just speak plain English to like regular people. That's all we are at the end of the day.
Be a real human and engage with humans on a human level.
Yes. Again, probably easier said than done.
Well, again, leaders aren't often taught those skills. So that skill development, leadership development needs to change. And,
but part of being human is the fact that you're not perfect. So, you know, we can all take that to heart.
Awesome. Well, Eryn, it's been absolutely incredible having you on the show, and we have many more podcast episodes we could do and topics we could discuss. So, thank you for bringing your wisdom, your insight, and amazing energy to the call. And yeah, I will make sure I post your links to your website and LinkedIn in the show notes, and so people can find you online and soak up more of your awesomeness.
Yeah, we'll keep the conversation going.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. That wraps up another episode of the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, which guests or topics would you like to see featured on the show? Message me through LinkedIn or on the contact page of timborys.com with your ideas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Borys with Fresh Wellness Group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.